I told you in the last video that I would discuss the three towers and their location and the implication it has for the layout of Jerusalem, but I will do that later. In this video I will tell you about the history of the citadel that ultimately became Fortress Antonia. And that will be about its location, its size, and the logical consequence that has for the original size of the temple square and the likelihood of that being true, or rather the likelihood of that being wrong. Now, the story of the citadel starts with the Hasmonean king. And in order to bring you up to speed, I'll show you some of the passages of Josephus and the picture that emerge from those descriptions. The first passage is from Josephus' Jewish Antiquities, chapter 15, book 15, chapter 11, paragraph 4. And I'll quote that here. Now, on the north side of the temple was built a citadel, whose walls were square and strong and of extraordinary firmness. And the citadel was built by the kings of the Hasmonean race, who were also high priests before Herod. And they called it the tower, in which were deposited the vestments of the high priest. And it continued here, the description of that specific structure. But for the tower itself, when Herod, the king of the Jews, had fortified it more firmly than before in order to secure and guard the temple, he gratified Antonius, who was his friend and the Roman ruler, and then gave it the name of the Tower of Antonia. So what is being said here is that this citadel, which he renamed to Fortress Antonia, the Tower of Antonia, was in fact a citadel built by the Hasmonean kings on the north side of the temple. And the next thing that is important to note is that King Herod fortified it more firmly here in this quote. Now, the second quote is from the Jewish Antiquities, book number 18, and we are talking about chapter 4, paragraph 3, where the following thing is being said. Although at this time they were laid up in the Tower of Antonia. He is talking about the vestments again. They were in Fortress Antonia, the citadel, so called, and that on the occasion following. There was one of the high priests named Hyrcanus, and as there were many of that name, he was the first of them. This man built a tower near the temple, and when he had done so, he generally dwelt in it. But when Herod became king, he rebuilt this tower, which was very conveniently situated in a magnificent manner. And because he was a friend to Antonius, he called it by the name of Antonia. So we are talking here about exactly the same construction, and more or less the same information is being relayed here, built by the high priest Hyrcanus, so an Hasmonean king. And in this case, it was not fortifying the construction, but he was rebuilding the construction, our friend Herod. Now, the third quotation is from the Jewish Antiquities, book number 12, chapter 9, paragraph 3. And take in mind that this passage is pre-Herodian. In fact, we are here discussing a time a few decades after the citadel was built by Hyrcanus. And I quote, "At this time, it was that the garrison in the citadel of Jerusalem, with the Jewish renegades, did a great deal of harm to the Jews, for the soldiers that were in that garrison rushed out upon the sudden, and destroyed such that were going up to the temple in order to offer their sacrifice. For the citadel adjoined to and overlooked the temple. Now, being important here is that it was built very near the temple. It was even adjoined to the temple, and it was overlooking the temple. And the last passage is more or less the same information, also pre-Herodian, and forced him to fly to the citadel, which was at Jerusalem. And when Nicanor came down from the citadel unto the temple, etc. Here again, the picture is made that the citadel was on an elevated position and very close to the temple. In fact, so close that he could climb down from the temple, from the citadel unto the temple. Now, there is a passage in Jewish Antiquities, book 13, chapter 6, where we are told that the citadel was demolished by Simon the high priest. And that is about 150 years or so, 100 years after that it was built. The citadel was demolished probably because the citadel was occupied for several years by the Macedonians. So we are talking about the times of Alexander the Great. And whether or not this was the same citadel that was being built by the Hasmoneans is a little bit unclear. That would mean that the high priest was homeless for a while, so to speak. And if this passage refers to the same citadel, then it was apparently rebuilt within a century, because Herod did find the vestments in the citadel that was built by the Hasmoneans. So, the last passage I want to read again is the passage we have seen before, that is namely the description Josephus gave us of the fortress of Antonia. But now we know that there was an history before that. We will get a more clear picture. Again, it is positioned on the northwest side of the temple. It was on an elevated position, and here it was not rebuilt or it was not fortified, but just plainly it was the work of King Herod. And then he started the description which leads to the conclusion that it was a very large construction. In fact, it was so large that it had all the convenience, such as courts and other things that cities wanted, and it might seem to be composed of several cities even. So big, in fact, that there always lay a garrison in that tower. So here the idea is the same, still located on the same size, Fortress Antonia, but now it was just the work of King Herod. Now, I think we are no more aware of its history, and that it used to be the Hasmonean Citadel, which was not just only more fortified or just rebuilt by Herod, but apparently also enlarged. Now, we have the following picture that emerges. If we have the conventional layout, then we know, based on what we have read before, that the north part of the temple was apparently being situated here when the Hasmonean kings built their palace just north of the temple. Because it was the year 200 BC that this first Hasmonean king did build the citadel just north of the temple, adjoined to the temple. So when Herod became king and he started all his magnificent works, what he could not have done was to extend the temple square that much, because this border was already there and that one as well, because this is the Kidron Valley, and this border was attached to the house that the Hasmonean king had, and that later was extended to Fortress Antonia. So the only thing that Herod could have extended a little bit was on the west side and on the south side. And I do have some problems with that. First of all, it is a very odd place to build your citadel when you are a king and a high priest. Because let's take in mind that the size of the city was about this. That was the old city attached to the temple, and then some extensions towards the upper city. We are talking here about 200 BC. Let's not forget that Bethsaida, that is this suburb here, was only added to Jerusalem in the 1st century AD. This wall here was built in 50 AD. And it all started with the citadel here, the Zion, with David. And, well, then it was extended a little bit, but the size of the city must have been something about this. So this is a very strange location to build your temple, your citadel, your palace. You should build your house over here, close to the temple in the midst of the city, or maybe here, when it's a more elevated position, or maybe you rebuild the palace of David, which was located over here, most likely, but not there. And the second thing is that King Herod apparently didn't extend this temple square that much. And it would lead to the conclusion that the construction that we might find here must be of pre-Hasmonean period. So that brings us very close to the times of Zerubbabel. Because when we are pre-Hasmonean, then we are only a few centuries away from Zerubbabel. And probably that must have been, in that case, the footprint of the Temple of Solomon as well. Now, the problem I have with that is that this size is ridiculously big. If we have here the Temple Mount and here Fortress Antonia, I will show you how this compares to, for instance, the square we find in Mecca around the Kaaba. I show you that here in the same scale as the Temple Square. And to show you the contours, this is the contour of the square under the open air. And here there might be cloisters, so that might be that big, but this is the open square of the space around the Kaaba. And we can do the same for the square we can find in the Vatican. We can put some contours there as well for the cloisters, but this is the Temple Square in Rome, and as you can see, they fit both easily on the Temple Square. Moreover, I'll show you here in the same scale the Red Square in Moscow, and I can give you the contours as well of that. And then we have the contours of the Red Square, and as you can see, you can put the St. Peter Square in the Vatican, as well as the square around the Kaaba, as well as the Red Square on top of the Temple Square, and you still have space spare space. And that must have been built in prior to 200 BC. So remember, humanity has just left the Bronze Age at that time. Now that is very unlikely. If we compare that, on the other hand, with a situation with the alternative, namely that the temple is located here on this side, then in that case the Hasmonean king did build his temple over here. And I have to say that that is a far more logical place, because when you build a citadel over here, you can overlook the temple. Maybe you can even see the lower city, but you have a very clear picture on the upper city and the lower city here when you have your citadel located here. It means that Herod couldn't have extended the temple plain, the temple square here, as much either. Maybe a few meters on the west side and on the south side, but not that much. If we read Josephus on Herod's work on the temple, then that could be confirmed, because he is talking a lot about the makeover and the renovations, but not so much about extensions of the temple square. So at the end of the day, this fits more with regards to the work of the location where the Hasmonean king placed his citadel, and it also fits this situation more, because if we compare the alternative site of the temple with the site of Mecca, then I can tell you that the open space around the Kaaba is still smaller than the open space around the temple. So don't tell me that this area is too small for a temple, because it's still very large. If we compare it to the St. Peter, we show you that the size of the temple, well, it's roughly the same. And it makes it already very impressive when you realize that this construction of the temple was built on a ridge, namely the ridge of Mount Moriah, and that the temple square had to be constructed by making a construction like this, of the size of what they built in Mecca, of the size of what they built in Rome. So that is very impressive, especially when you realize that they did that just when humanity left the Bronze Age. Anyway, the conclusion for me is that this is the original temple location, is not very likely. In fact, this is a very odd place, and the size of the square is ridiculously large. Okay, now next time we want to discuss a few things Josephus tells us about things of Jerusalem, giving us some angles and distances. Thank you for listening.